June 6, 1944. Dawn. The English Channel glitters like hammered steel as our landing craft ramp slams down. I shove the throttle forward. Crack! A scream of metal. My propeller shears clean off, flinging salt spray and shrapnel. In 3 heartbeats, my platoon is splashing toward Utah Beach while I spin helplessly, engine dead, bullets pinging off the hull like hail on a tin roof. Radio? Only sandpaper static. Compass? Quivering. A rogue current grabs the crippled tractor, dragging me east toward a thicket of mined obstacles the boys call dragon's teeth. I tighten my grip on the M1 across my chest and mutter a promise to nobody but the wind. If I ever set foot on French sand, I'll carry every soul I meet home in my memory. What followed were 16 hours of crawling hedgerows, dodging patrols, and witnessing a rooster crow the strangest miracle I've ever seen. But it all began with that single broken propeller. Salt stung my eyes the instant I knew something was wrong. I'd trained myself to feel the beat of that gray marine engine the way a farmer senses the rhythm of his own heartbeat. When the cadence skipped, my gut skipped with it. Then came the shriek, like a buzzsaw chewing anchor chain, and the whole amphibious tractor lurched. In the split-second hush that followed, I understood. The propeller was gone. Thrust turned to froth, and our bow slewed broadside to the surf. C Company thundered past, tracks churning water, 50 cals spitting fire. The coxswain hollered something that cannon blast swallowed whole. I grabbed the radio handset, nothing but snow, slapped the metal casing as if anger could conjure a signal. The sea is a poor listener when guns are speaking. "Dump the weight," I barked at Private Ellis, the lanky boy beside me. We pitched ammo crates overboard, hoping to lift the stern, but it was like throwing marbles at an avalanche. The current seized our dead craft, dragging us east toward Belgian gates, crusted with barnacles and laced with mines. Cordite from distant shell bursts burned my nose. Each concussion slapped my ribs as if the channel itself were scolding me. Ellis looked the color of skimmed milk. "What now, Sarge?" "The beach," I said. "One way or another." I slung the M1, cinched my chin strap tight. The ramp was half submerged, foam washing the deck. We'd rehearsed this in Devon with blank rounds and polite waves. Now the water was black with fuel and copper-tasting blood. I stepped down, knees buckling at the cold shock. For a heartbeat I floated, weightless between sky and surf, hearing only my pulse. Then my boots found sand. Utah Beach loomed 100 yards west, but every yard might be the last. I glanced back once, saw the shattered propeller drifting like a steel petal, and vowed I'd hang it on my porch if I lived through the next hour. June 6, 1944. Dawn. The English Channel glitters like hammered steel as our landing craft ramp slams down. I shove the throttle forward. Crack! A scream of metal. My propeller shears clean off, flinging salt spray and shrapnel. In 3 heartbeats, my platoon is splashing toward Utah Beach while I spin helplessly, engine dead, bullets pinging off the hull like hail on a tin roof. Radio? Only sandpaper static. Compass? Quivering. A rogue current grabs the crippled tractor, dragging me east toward a thicket of mined obstacles the boys call dragon's teeth. I tighten my grip on the M1 across my chest and mutter a promise to nobody but the wind. If I ever set foot on French sand, I'll carry every soul I meet home in my memory. What followed were 16 hours of crawling hedgerows, dodging patrols, and witnessing a rooster crow the strangest miracle I've ever seen. But it all began with that single broken propeller. Sand gave way to sucking mud the color of wood smoke. Every footstep felt like a bargain with the earth. Lift, drag, pray the suction didn't pull the boots clean off your bones. I stumbled past a scatter of tank traps and barbed coils. Each shell burst, carving new craters that filled instantly with seawater. Behind me, Utah Beach was a furnace of tracers. Before me, Normandy's infamous bocage hedgerows rose like green fortresses, stitched with brambles so thick, daylight turned to emerald twilight beneath their arches. A pocked-over fieldstone wall marked the first of those living corridors. I pressed my back to its moss-slick surface, chest heaving like the bellows at my father's forge. Private Ellis wasn't there. Somewhere between the surf and the seawall, he'd vanished, swiped by smoke or destiny. For the first time that day, I was wholly alone. My map was pulp from seawater, so I unfolded the sliver that still clung to legible ink. A compass rose, a faint crossroads, the name Saint-Germain-la-Rivière. I reckoned if I kept the wind off my left cheek, I'd angle southwest, maybe intersect the paratroopers we'd heard were dropping inland. Trouble was, every hedgerow twisted like a serpent, and each turn carried the hush of ambush. Crouched low, I eased through a cattle gap. The air smelled of wet hay and cordite. A distant lark sang, then clipped off mid-note as machine gun chatter answered an unseen target. I advanced by inches, using the M1's bayonet like a walking stick, parting nettles and vines. Twice I froze at the thunk of mortars. Shrapnel hissed overhead, clipping leaves that fell around me like lethal confetti. A rusted manure cart blocked the path ahead. Its iron rim shattered, spokes splayed like the ribs of some prehistoric beast. I skirted it, boots squelching in muck, only to stop dead at the sound of men's voices, low, hurried German. 3 silhouettes moved along the opposite hedge, rifles slung casual but eyes alert. I dropped flat, face pressed to muddy sod, heartbeat hammering louder than their footsteps. One trooper paused to light a cigarette, flare of the match painting his cheekbone amber. Smoke curled upward, mingling with powder mist. After what felt like a lifetime, the trio drifted on, boots crunching gravel until quiet reclaimed the lane. I exhaled slowly, tasting soil and adrenaline. The hedgerow had swallowed me, and I realized this living maze could be tomb or tunnel depending on my next choice. I chose forward. The hedgerow spat me into a clearing where a stone cottage crouched beneath a slate roof the color of storm clouds. Smoke drifted from a crooked chimney, sweet with the scent of applewood. Hunger, sudden and savage, twisted my gut. I realized I hadn't eaten since the channel crossing. I skirted a patch of nettles and tapped the butt of my rifle against the stable door. No answer. Only the shuffle of hooves and a mule's indignant snort. I eased inside. Dust-bright sunbeams sliced the gloom, revealing a hayloft ladder and an abandoned pitchfork. Before I could shut the door, a slim shadow filled the frame. A young woman in a faded calico dress, braid tucked under a scarf the color of marigolds. In her arms, a loaf of bread still steaming from the oven. Our eyes locked. The world went pin-drop quiet except for distant artillery, rumbling like gods clearing their throats. I lifted both palms, rifle hanging harmless by its sling. She raised the bread as if it were a shield, then noticed the U.S. flag patch on my shoulder. Her lips parted, not in fear, but in something closer to pity. "Je suis Jeanne," she whispered. It was all the English she owned, yet enough. She pointed to the loft, mimed sleep, then laid the loaf on a barrel and slipped out, latch clicking behind her. I broke the crust, crackling music to a starving man, and the aroma of yeast and rosemary nearly buckled my knees. I tore off a hunk still hot enough to sting and stuffed half into my field jacket for later. Minutes stretched. I listened to the mule chew, to the scrape of Jeanne's footsteps moving from cottage to yard. When a distant mortar thumped, she paused, tiny silhouette against a square of fading light, then carried on stacking firewood, as if daring the war to interrupt her chores. Night bled across the fields. A single lantern flickered in the cottage window, painting her shadow on the curtain. I climbed the ladder and burrowed into straw that smelled of summer before the war. Through a cracked board, I saw Jupiter rising over the orchard, and felt the absurd comfort of being safely lost. Before sleep dragged my eyelids shut, I pressed my dog tag to the loaf and mouthed a silent vow. If this bread carries me through the night, I'll return after the guns fall silent, and bring her a loaf from home. Somewhere below, Jeanne sang a lullaby to the mule, and for the first time since the propeller shattered, my heartbeat slowed to a human pace. I woke to straw crackling under my cheek and a whisper of footsteps on the ladder. Jeanne's lantern haloed her features. She pressed a finger to her lips and handed me a tin cup of chicory coffee that smelled like burnt caramel. "Allemands," she breathed, pointing toward the orchard. She mimed rifles, 3 of them, then touched her braid to signal speed. They were moving fast. Daybreak spilled gray milk across the yard as we crept from the stable. Frost crusted the grass. Each step crunched like a breaking code. Jeanne guided me toward a low stone wall veined with ivy, then pressed a rough potato sack into my hands. Inside, bread, an apple, and her grandfather's brass compass, tarnished but sure. She tapped the compass, tapped my heart, then the distant hedgerow. Even without words, the message was patent. "Find your lines, soldier." We parted with a nod. I slipped into the orchard just as a Kubelwagen engine sputtered up the lane. I belly-crawled beneath gnarled apple trees, dew soaking my jacket, and wedged myself between 2 root buttresses blanketed in moss. 5 German infantry debarked, their boots crunching frost in slow, predatory rhythm. One carried a handheld searchlight powered by a clunky battery pack that hummed like a hive. The beam sliced through branches, carving white tunnels in the dawn haze. It glared off my helmet, and I yanked it off, pressing my face to cold mud. The soldier swung the light back, puzzled, advancing. 10 paces away, a rooster atop a fence post exploded into morning song. Full-throated, defiant, absurdly patriotic in its own barnyard tongue. Every head turned. The searchlight beam snapped to the bird, its feathers glowing like molten copper. The private laughed, nudged his comrade, and mimed shooting it for supper. Their corporal barked a curt order, "Waiter!" and the unit trudged on, searchlight now fixed ahead. I held my breath until the Kubelwagen's gears ground back into motion and faded toward the main road. Only then did I exhale, realizing a rooster had stolen the spotlight meant for me. I touched the potato sack in gratitude, whispered "Merci, mon ami," to bird and woman alike, then crawled south as the sky paled to silver, compass needles steady as resolve. Luck, I concluded, sometimes wears feathers. By late afternoon, the sky had bruised to purple, and every hedgerow shadow felt thick enough to drown in. Then, pop! A green flare burst overhead, dripping emerald fire onto the fields. A second followed, then a third, until the clouds glowed like stained glass. Paratroopers. I quickened my crawl, compass needle and instinct both tugging me southwest. Bullets still cracked in the distance, but here the only sound was my own ragged breath and the whoosh of flares. I rounded a corner and almost bayoneted a man in khaki camo smeared with charcoal. He swung his Thompson up and froze when he saw the U.S. flag on my sleeve. "Currahee," he whispered. 506th PIR, Easy Company. A dozen troopers emerged from the hedge, faces striped with mud, eyes bright with adrenaline and relief. Their Sergeant Baker clapped me on the shoulder. "Lost your taxi, Sarge." He flashed a grin wide enough to shame the moon. When I told him I'd been adrift since dawn, his grin faded to respect. They gave me half a Hershey bar, a swallow of watered-down bourbon, and a place in their column. We moved through the gloaming in leapfrog formation, one squad advancing while the other covered, boots silent on damp earth. Every flare painted us ghosts, sometimes lime green, sometimes bone white. Above the tree line, a distant church steeple speared the clouds like a promise of shelter. Baker tapped his map, then tapped the steeple. We angled toward it, all else forgotten but the instinct a soldier shares with magnetized steel, drift to the nearest hard point when the night turns liquid. The church was no more than 30 feet wide, stone walls pitted by shrapnel, stained glass saints replaced by plywood and prayer. Rain began as we slipped through a side door sagging on its hinges. The inside smelled of wet limestone and candle smoke long extinguished. Beneath the altar lay a British radio man, leg wrapped in a blood-soaked field dressing. His set was intact but useless, antenna shattered. Baker knelt to check the pulse. I felt for morphine, but had none. We settled on spirits, a splash of bourbon to dull the edge while we improvised a stretcher. The chapel's pump organ crouched in the corner, battered yet beautiful. We unbolted two of its longest zinc pipes, lashed them to our rifles, and threaded a torn altar cloth between. St. Luke would have approved the ingenuity. All the while, the radio man smiled through clenched teeth, murmuring about Liverpool rain that never smelled like gunpowder. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, Baker hummed a bar from Amazing Grace, voice low, half apology to the shattered instrument. Lightning flickered through broken panes, illuminating angel faces flaked by age. For a brief moment, the chapel seemed to breathe, war and worship sharing one heartbeat. We lifted the radio man, pipes bending but holding, and slipped back into the storm. Not a note of that organ would ever play again, yet its final service might save a man's life. That felt like music enough. We trudged through pre-dawn drizzle, hedgerows now silhouettes against a charcoal horizon. The wounded Brit clung to consciousness, whispering soccer scores from the season he'd missed. Every 100 yards we rotated bearers. My arms burned, but my heart felt lighter than it had all day. Shared purpose tends to do that. Just after first light, we crested a ridge and smelled the sea. Tarry, metallic, unmistakable. Utah Beach lay half a mile west, littered with wrecks and landing tracks pressed into sand like dinosaur prints. Allied smoke markers still drifted in lazy ribbons. The bulk of the fighting had rolled inland, leaving the shore eerily calm. Baker's squad signaled me forward. "Your boys are down there," he said. I offered Jeanne's compass back. He shook his head. "Souvenir, reminds you which way is home." We shook hands, paratrooper grip, thumb lock, and squeeze, then parted. The Brit managed a thumbs up before disappearing into the mist, organ pipes jouncing like church bells in motion. I half strode, half stumbled down the dune, boots filling with sand again. And there, by a makeshift field kitchen, stood my platoon sergeant, Hawk, frying spam in a dented pan. He spotted me and hooted, "Miller! Nice of you to take the scenic route." Laughter rippled through the chow line. I saluted with sand-caked fingers and nearly wept at the smell of burnt meat. After debrief, Hawk led me to the salvage pile where damaged gear awaited return ships. On top, like a defiant fossil, lay the broken propeller from my tractor, jagged edge still greasy with channel brine. "Found it floating near a minesweeper," Hawk said. "Figured you'd want the world's ugliest souvenir." I traced the fracture line with one thumb, metal cold as the dawn I'd crawled through. My jacket still held half a loaf of Jeanne's bread, now hard as a brick yet fragrant of rosemary and hearth. I remembered my vow in the hayloft, to bring her a loaf from home when this madness ended. I tucked a scrap into my breast pocket, proof the promise existed, and shouldered the propeller like a farmer hefts a plow. That afternoon, requisition clerks tried to tag it for scrap. I marked it personal effects in bold pencil. It would sail with me across 2 oceans and hang on my porch for the next 80 years, orange with rust, but bright with memory. Jeanne's compass? It lived in my bedside drawer, needle still jittering toward some eternal north of gratitude. War pushes men to collect strange trophies, helmets, medals, enemy flags. Mine were a kitchen utensil of steel and a chunk of country bread. Yet whenever porch wind chimes rattle against that propeller blade, I smell applewood smoke and hear a rooster crowing in French dawn, reminding me that luck, kindness, and stubborn promises survive long after empires crumble. That broken propeller now rests on the west wall of my porch, rust freckles spreading like age spots on an old hand, and every time the wind jangles it, I'm back in Normandy, tasting salt, hearing flares hiss, feeling straw beneath my shoulder blades. People ask what victory felt like. To me, it tasted like warm bread shared in a barn, and sounded like a rooster stealing a soldier's searchlight. If you've listened this far, hold that picture close. Even in the loudest moments of history, It's often the quiet kindness that keeps us breathing. Next week, I'll tell you about Christmas Eve in the Ardennes, when a single cigarette drew a white line through enemy trenches and proved frost can't freeze goodwill. Until then, keep your compass steady and your promises warmer than winter steel. Thanks for walking beside me, old friends. See you in the next chapter.